History. History always is, at best, like this story, a chiaroscuro. The 23 Club by Edward Flaherty. Episode 9. Finding Majlis. Majlis is an Arabic term meaning a place of sitting, used to describe various types of special gatherings and places of special gatherings among common interest groups, be it religious, administrative, or social. Part 1. The Plan. Early in his expatriate career, Chalmers had a mentor who had, for decades, already been working in Iran, Turkey, and the Middle East. He told Chalmers that their white-collar management and consultancy positions, in the pecking order here, were exactly the same as the sweaty laborers on site. White-collar, blue-collar, no difference. Hired, manipulable, and replaceable. They were all no counters. Experience in this part of the world had taught Chalmers that strict plans and aggressive adherence to them would guarantee the cross-cultural undoing of any Western professional. But he also knew that without a plan, these large projects could never succeed in the time frame required. He always kept an overall plan foremost in his mind. That gave him big-picture guidelines, such that he could always revise the details in real time, depending on time, circumstance, and people. This was performance art in action. It was Thursday. Toons wanted his update and briefing at 9 p.m. at the one and only library, a place where he sometimes met a couple key Emiratis who had interest in his empty quarter project, Liwa Kasar. To prepare himself for that briefing, Chalmers planned to arrive earlier than usual to sit with Jean-Claude. Chalmers wanted to review his own findings, checking them against Jean-Claude's in-depth knowledge of political and social contexts in the region. The library, where Chalmers was to meet Jean-Claude and later Toons, was a refuge, carefully hidden, deep within a mysterious sequence of intimate, private gardens. Part 2. Library Gardens. Finding the library, at the one and only, was a real-life garden mystery, an exquisite challenge, like walking through the Alhambra for the first time. If you liked walking through garden rooms, then you would find here not just any garden rooms, but an entrancing sequence of garden rooms without any repeating units. You would find windows and doors, tempting you with alluring glimpses, sensual opportunities, timeless experiences. For the first-time guest, finding the way through required a letting go of the disciplined left side of the brain, accepting an invisible flowing thread of energy that was inherent in the gardens themselves, becoming a captive, or becoming captivated by the gardens. Really, it was all a bit magical. Chalmers arrived by cab at the parking lot porte-cochere tent. The tent had a style, and so did the one and only attendants, gardenesque, relaxed. The attendants were dressed in Moroccan-style farmer's trousers, with full-cut baggy legs tied at the calves with a very low crotch cut at the knees. They took Chalmers' overnight bag from the cab, then offered him, if he would like, a seat in the tent, scented towels to refresh, and cooled herb water to drink. Chalmers declined to sit down, requested the attendants to deliver his bag to the library, and then asked the best way to the library. From the tent porte-cochere, they showed him the main path and 2 secondary paths, then told him the choice was his, because all paths ultimately led to the library. Chalmers chose one of the secondary paths. It was just after 7 p.m., and his meeting with Jean-Claude wasn't until 8. He was looking forward to this garden walk, to this brief dalliance. He started eagerly. The aged-looking concrete path was about 2 meters wide, not colored, probably heavily salted and irregularly sandblasted originally, but at intervals along the path, about every 3 meters, it was crossed with narrow bands of dark blue small mosaic tiles. It was a simple accent band, nothing fancy, and imparted thus to the path a soft, relaxing rhythm. The sun had just set. As he walked, Chalmers saw sunset sky reflections in the mosaic tile bands. They reflected a subtle pattern to his eyes. Some of the 2 centimeter by 2 centimeter mosaic tiles were satin finish, and others were matte finish. The result was a subtle, small-scale, repeating geometric pattern. Before long, Chalmers found himself in an oasis-like grove of date palms, Phoenix dactylifera. The date palms were tall, mature, old. None had been trimmed. Under each tall palm were shrubby clumps of multiple offshoots, multiple suckers. They were pushing out in every direction, rough but full and healthy, like an old, timeless date palm oasis that had never ever been managed for its fruit. The place had that kind of character. It was wild, date palms of all sizes, sand, sky, crepuscular colors, chiaroscuro values, and wind, just stirring enough to agitate a coarse rattling from the tops of the tallest palms, from their old, lifeless skirts of drooping fronds. It was a strange rustling, clattering sound, coming and going. His path now offered a fork. There was an engraved signpost at the fork, with a bronze plaque, which had this quote from Samuel Taylor Coleridge: "For he on honeydew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise." The verse gave him no idea which way to go. Through the tangle of date palms he peered ahead for opportunity along each fork. He saw portions of tall stucco walls ahead in both directions. He listened. From the right he heard a soft and steady burbling sound, flowing water, and its innate promise of relief. From the left he heard nothing. He walked the right fork, pulled by the sound of the water. He liked that sound of water. He trusted his ears. Through the wild date palm clumps his eyes could see only parts of what appeared to be a continuous wall, maybe 3 meters tall, a rough stucco, taupe in color. The path curved and took him towards a tall domed portal, certainly his way through the wall, certainly his continuation of his ride on the sound of flowing water. Part 3. Fountain Courtyard. The way through the wall wasn't a door. It was more than a door, more than an opening. For a Westerner like Chalmers, it was a Lewis Carroll experience. It was an archway through a portal including a beautifully proportioned, glossy turquoise blue dome. The portal from the ground to the top of the dome was maybe 4 meters tall. Its archway edges had a pair of cut-out corner niches at both sides of the portal entry. Built into the niches behind ornate screens were flame-filled bowls. In the fading crepuscule, Chalmers could not miss these delicate fire-bowl luminaires, the fire licking upwards, by itself a visual magnet, nor could he miss, in front of the flames, the ornate screen richly patterned with Persian flowers and vines twining upwards. Chalmers' eyes flitted between the foreground Persian screen pattern and the background luminaire flames, both licking, both teasing his eyes. He had to pause to take it all in. He had lost, he had forgotten, He no longer heard the sound of water. The fireball luminaires were at his eye level. At 60 centimeters wide and 30 centimeters tall, these low-profile bowls contained flames fueled by gas. Behind them in their niches was a circular geometric progression pattern, dominated by cream-color, small-size mosaic tiles that spread out and linked up to the edges and frames, and finally merged seamlessly with the niche frame mosaic, creams, turquoises, dark blues. Walking under the archway into the portal, Chalmers noted that the overhead soft light inside was indirectly reflected off the dome's interior surface. He saw the dome was lined with small mosaic tiles, an 8-point circular geometric pattern, dominated by creams, accented by dark blues and turquoises. He paused again. Surrounded as he was inside the portal by the 4 matched fireball luminaires, Chalmers delighted in the subtlety of light, the elegance of pattern, and the dimensional comfortability of the space. He thought, "This is spectacular. Beautiful. This is what landscape architecture is supposed to be. Captivating and inspirational garden rooms. Doors. Absolutely great experience." Then, anticipation growing, he forced himself to move on. Having just entered a new courtyard, he paused to observe a change in paving. At his feet, he saw not rough textured concrete, but a paving that looked more like a carpet now. In the center of the path, a cream mosaic geometric medallion sat on a background field of dark blue mosaic. Up ahead, the cream medallion mosaic evolved into a thin, linear cream mosaic geometric pattern that carried Chalmers' eyes down the center of the path, ahead to the middle of the courtyard, and the source of the sound he had earlier been seeking, a water feature. Its sound, refreshing as when he first heard it. He walked forward slowly and looked at the low, dome-structured fountain, the construction maybe a meter or so high in the center and perhaps with 4 meters diameter in plan. As he continued to catalogue the details, the right side of his brain overwhelmed him. He could no longer measure the fountain. He could only... Water heaving from the dome's oculus, bright swelling nub of water on top, a voluptuous movement, more than refreshment, a deeper fulfillment, a promise of new life, burbling flow of water down the sides, gently shimmering over the shapely dome. Chalmers was beckoned, then absorbed by its sound and imagery. Enchanted, he continued walking toward it and paused at the edge. The water flowed freely, sensual inputs flooding his eyes and ears, simple pleasures. He took full advantage of them. With his eyes, he wrapped his hands around the attractive dome, and in this subliminal possession he took pleasure. Then he leaned over and plunged both of his hands onto the dome's surface, into the flow of the water, his hands flat against the dome supporting his entire weight. He yielded to the flow. The water was strong. The water pushed over his wrists and up his forearms. Chalmers took the energy from it, fully, freely. He pulled his hands out and let them hang limply at his sides. He had taken the energy from the pleasure dome, and now his arms and hands felt relaxed, spent, cooling in the strangely warm evening air, while his eyes still enjoyed the rapturous water movement. Chalmers looked at the fountain edge, its raised edge, circular like the dome. It was a coping wide enough and high enough to function also as a seat wall. He sat down on it and recovered a bit. He liked the visual texture and tactile feel of the coping material. Flamed granite, eased at the edges. Color was a brownish gray with sparkling metallic orange flecking. The fountain's dome was tiled, a patterned mosaic, beginning at the oculus, the circular source at the top, and then, as it descended down the dome's sides, elaborated to 12 points, where the water disappeared at the coping edge. The pattern symmetries played joyfully, light and water rubbing over them, over each other, caressing each other, sparkling, glistening, always changing wavelets, each unpredictably enhancing the graceful yet unchanging mosaic geometries underneath. He pulled his eyes away and looked around the courtyard. He found it to be intimate, delicate, balanced, symmetrical. 4 walls, 4 domed portals with archways, one in the middle of each wall, and 8 fireball luminaire niches, 2 at each archway. There were hidden wall sconces, uplighting a 70-centimeter wide engraved arabesque band that connected at eye level all 8 fireball luminaires. He imagined himself inside a gift-wrapped jewel box, an elegant and ethereal experience. Those same sconces provided a uniform backlight for the palm tree trunk silhouettes he had just noticed. In this courtyard were irregularly spaced mature palms in numbers. Those palms, the only plants in the courtyard, were slender, delicate, clean, single-trunk palms, with overlapping umbrella-like canopies, insufficient numbers to elicit a feeling in the courtyard, to impart a distinct character. Chalmers looked carefully, and in the dim twilight he noted the horizontal bandings on the smooth gray trunks, a bit like royal palms, but much smaller, the same size as foxtails, but not foxtails. His eyes followed up the trunk, and saw the small, loose clusters of red berries, the red fruits. They were Veitchii marillii, manila palms. They had about 4 or 5, maybe some had 6 meters of clear trunk. The palms sat in a fine crushed gravel, like a grit. Aside from the mosaic paving, that grit was the courtyard ground plane surface. Beneath the palm canopy, scattered randomly in this courtyard, were 5 or 6 teak chairs, some upright, some loungers. They looked comfortable. Chalmers stood up, walked over, and took one of the teak chairs. He arranged it to where he could easily see the intricate details of both the fountain in the center and also, at the same time, the engraved arabesque band around the perimeter of the courtyard wall. The highly refined, well-crafted engraved band contrasted nicely, being slightly raised above the rough stucco surface of the 3-meter-high courtyard wall. The band of Jiri arabesque carving, a continuously self-replicating repetition of patterned lines, 3-dimensional interlacing, geometrically intertwined and overlapping, reminded Chalmers of M.C. Escher's visual puzzles. Looking up through the overstory of well-established palms, Chalmers liked the relaxed, mature feeling of character in this courtyard. He felt comfortable. Chalmers relaxed in the chair. From a nearby mosque, the sunset Maghreb call to prayer had commenced. He listened to the prayer call. The melody drew his attention, and the water flow became the background. Back and forth, between the central fountain patterns and the perimeter strapwork band patterns around the courtyard walls, Chalmers let his eyes wander, focus on one, then the other. As his eyes traced the patterned path of the tiles, moving from one pattern to another, in and out and in, again and again, his intelligence wandered, his mind wandered. Without notice, time passed. He shook himself. He realized that all along in this courtyard he had been hypnotized by the art and craft of architectural details. Intricate surface decorations and subtle, indirect lighting, and teased and tempted, had beckoned his eyes to follow complex geometric patterns. That in turn led him to discover the smallest repeating unit while uncovering multiple new units along the way. It was a strange but wonderful experience wherein the patterns themselves had taken his eyes on a journey that included multiple times getting lost, then rediscovering the way again, until he had found himself in some sort of meditative state. He had just experienced a sophisticated blending of art and architecture wherein time had been blurred. A mesmerizing chiaroscuro of light in this garden had carried him into a different type of chiaroscuro, where reality slips into dream. Or was it trance? Trance, maybe not too different from the music and dance of Islamic Sufism, losing track of time. Chalmers paused and thought. The historically rich edges of Islam were always more culturally intriguing, more rewarding than the fundamentalist core, certainly as far as art, music, and architecture were concerned. And there was one thing he did know. These were the walks, in the evenings, in the gardens, provided by the wealth of these oil countries, that told Chalmers he was back in his milieu. Then, as he sat alone, there came to him, on the breeze, a lighter than light fragrance. Then a stronger, though similar fragrance brushed across his face. The fragrance wafted teasingly into near recognition, a fragrance stronger than that borne by any woman, yet plucking the same strings. There were no fragrant plants in this courtyard. Somewhere not too far away, out in the larger landscape beyond this little garden, Chalmers guessed, had to be one castrum nocturnum, hidden away, intermittently sharing with all, on the light evening breeze, its intoxicating perfume. He had followed his ears to find this fountain courtyard. Now he would follow his nose. Part 4. Fragrance Courtyard. Chalmers rose, stretched, then began his search, walking in the direction of each of the 3 remaining portals. When following scents in the air, Chalmers' feet became impediments. He slogged, intent to find the source, to solve this garden mystery. At 2 of the portals, he lost the scent. At the last, the scent was stronger. He followed that path into a new courtyard until it took him to a T-junction. But he had lost the scent. Chalmers was surprised because the scent of what he figured was castrum nocturnum that had brought him to this courtyard should have by now overwhelmed him. He stood on the edge of a pungent plain of low, hummocky-shaped shrubs. A large panel of basil plants, Ocimum sanctum. This rectangular bed of ocimum was the central feature. Forming the far edges to the long sides of the rectangle were double rows of oleander, Nerium oleander, full-grown and double pink, directly against the face of the tall courtyard walls. By themselves, the Mediterranean maqui sweetness of oleander and the earthy Indian subtropical basil gave this entire courtyard a solid, earthy fragrance. But there was something about the mysterious missing scent, something irreplaceable in that lost fragrance which kept stirring Chalmers' emotions. To his surprise, he felt as if he was being emotionally compelled by something that, when lost, remains inexplicably and hauntingly irretrievable. A lost love, a deep affection gone missing. Out of his grasp, an emotional illusion had taken control. Awkwardly puzzled, he looked around in an attempt to stabilize his orientation. His entry path into this courtyard had not allowed him to get to its exact center. The courtyard was surrounded by walls all 3 meters high, but the shape of the courtyard was, like the central basil bed, rectangular in thankfully comfortable proportions, maybe golden mean proportions, pleasant, soothing to behold. That helped him. His entry portal, with its pair of flame-bowl luminaires, appeared to have been the only entry. The 2 long sides had no other openings, and this courtyard was definitely larger than the last. He looked to the left. On one of the narrow ends was a significant colonnade of 4 slender columns with connecting arches, proportioned very much like the Alhambra Court of the Myrtles, though this courtyard, unlike the Court of the Myrtles, had no obvious water features, save the surrogate-like ocimum bed. To his right, though, an exceptionally sparkling brilliance caught his eye, against the back wall of the courtyard, under an apparent bosque of trees. He could be sure of nothing other than a sparkling brilliance. The crepuscule and its chiaroscuro played with, deluded his depth perception. He walked toward the brilliance. Absent the sweet night fragrance for which he yearned, he let his eyes do the searching. As he walked, the details emerged. There was a small bosque. Within that bosque he saw a brightly lighted niche, within which appeared to be dancing polychromatic mukarna details. As he walked closer, he saw more of that lustrous polychromed niche in the wall. It protected a water spigot. The cast bronze spigot quietly sputtered. Drops. He was forced to stop, forced to look, to listen. The only sounds, the irregular solitary drips, falling into a circular basin of water plants, sitting at ground level. The bright mukarna was cheerful, but the hesitant drops of falling water were sad, lonely, uncertain. Chalmers shifted into analysis mode. A granite coping formed the basin edge, and was a convenient seat wall. The same color, texture, and dimension as he had just enjoyed in the fountain courtyard. He saw within the water basin Equisetum hyemale and Cyperus alternifolia, growing in partially submerged pots. He looked at the back wall of the water basin, the mukarna niche, 2.5 meters high by 1 3/4 meters wide, enclosed on its sides by a plaster band frame decorated with incised arabesque. The mukarna was a real three-dimensional eye-catcher. Its sparkling colors, cream, light mint green, dark jade green, and a golden filigree accenting all edges, it was a kid's ice cream treat for grown-up eyes. Everything glowed from the uplights hidden in the water basin. The basin's water surface, stirred into waves by the sputtering spigot above, refracted as lighted shadow lines, vibrating across, toying with, making alive in 4 dimensions the mukarna's 3-dimensional brilliant surfaces. That play of lights and shadow lines restfully massaged and calmed Chalmers' melancholy emotions. He was entranced by the light and color. Sight had overwhelmed sound. Well-designed details had taken him into another world of feelings, of thoughts. He made a note to himself. If the empty quarter Liwa Kasar project did not have garden-room experiences at least as captivating as these, worlds within worlds perceptions, weaving back and forth between reality and dreams, if Land ID had not done this well, he'd make sure to fix it, to make sure Liwa Kasar became magical for opening day. He looked around a bit. The paving had changed in this courtyard. No longer carpet-like, no longer concrete. 30 by 30 centimeter terracotta tiles in a diagonal field had soldier headers the same color and size along the edges. Restrained, nicely underplayed. The bosque was genteel, with a handful of randomly distributed multi-trunk trees, Millentonia hortensis, a good 10 to 12 meters tall. Chalmers wondered if perhaps these India cork trees had been the source of the fragrance. He checked. They were well and truly past their flowering season. Nevertheless, he did enjoy that they were surprisingly strong in appearance, well pruned, a joy to behold. They had excellent structure. He saw 2 walkways leaving the India cork tree bosque, each moving down the long axis in this courtyard toward the portico end. As Chalmers headed toward the portico, he searched for the missing fragrance, without success. Then the portico captured his eyes. It was every bit of, if not more than 2 stories tall. It sat up prominently on a substantial plinth raised 3 or 4 steps above the courtyard. Its horizontal facade was divided into fifths. The 2 on each end were undecorated building mass. The interior 3 were decorative arches projecting out toward him into the courtyard, with the main central arch the tallest. Chalmers moved toward the portico stairs. Before stepping up to the portico, he discovered multiple clusters of pots in the forecourt, at the edges of the stairs, Catharanthus roseus, varieties, hybrids, growing healthfully in medium-sized 50-centimeter terracotta pots. He brushed his hand across the foliage of the Madagascar periwinkle, releasing an aroma redolent with the bitterness of golden seal. These periwinkle had their own medicinal scent, brewing a real battle now in his nostrils, a real competition between the Madagascar periwinkle, the basil, and the oleander. Looking up, he saw the dominant central arch was carved from teak, columns, frames, and all. There was in the wood itself an incised arabesque pattern. Only faint light illuminated the arch facades. The stairs led only to the central arch, while the two side arches had balustrades protecting their edges. The main dramatic lighting was inside the portico itself, highlighting the ceiling, beckoning to Chalmers, "Come, enjoy me." Part 5. Madge's Portico. Chalmers climbed up the stairs onto the portico. The wood ceiling was well lit, revealing intricate polychrome traceries of light mint green and cream. He paused and with his eyes traced the ceiling woodwork. And then, without warning, that mystique, that fragrance arrived again, ever so gently weaving its way into his nose. Jessamine hints, he was sure, capturing his emotions at the same time. The geometric pattern on the ceiling unleashed his memories, and for the briefest moment he and Madge were together again in a villa in La Ville Nouvelle, Meknes, Morocco, as they had been decades ago when together they first discovered that magic of night-blooming jessamine. Yes, indeed, he was sure, Cestrum nocturnum. The jessamine had snuck its way back into his nostrils and firmly lodged there, quickly though briefly, carrying him away through time and space. He looked at the balustrade to his right and noted that the continuous rows of double pink oleanders along the side wall had been replaced just beyond the balustrade by two different plants of similar size at the portico corner. He walked over and inspected. Cestrum nocturnum, jessamine, night-blooming jessamine, mystery solved. He paused and inhaled deeply. In short time he remembered why so many people found this fragrance just too powerful. He looked across to the other side of the portico and saw mirrored two more Cestrum nocturnum. Memories and emotions teased Chalmers. Was he smelling cedarwood, too? His eyes again rose to inspect the interior ceiling details, which next led him under a spectacular ribbed dome that dissolved near the top into a tessellated full muqarna treatment. The polychromes now including gold and turquoise and dark blue and mint green and jade green, all uplighted by hidden lights. Suspended from the dome's center with just enough illumination to reveal the pattern was a brass lamp of substantial size, its metal worked in elegant Persian style with half palmettos backed by a tracery of vines and tendrils. His eyes danced back and forth between the lamp patterns and the muqarna dome patterns, absorbing their wonderful pleasures. The only thing to distract him was the overhead wood structure that led his eyes past the ribbed muqarna dome via the wood details, the beams, the cross beams, the dados, to a mishrabiyah enclosed overlook, opening toward the west. The promise of a view pulled him through, to the mesmerizing cut, geometric lace-like patterns which traditionally decorate a projecting wooden mishrabiyah. This mishrabiyah was pierced by three arched openings that framed a spell-binding view to the Gulf and the western horizon. Drawn to the view, he rested his hands on the balustrade rail and looked out at the thin crescent moon sitting softly, quietly, and magically, strong yet tender, still an hour above the horizon. He paused. The wind shifted, the night-blooming jasmine returned, and shut down all his senses. His memories, which previously had only been taunting him from the edges, now surrounded and captured him. As he inhaled, he was in Morocco again, together with Madge, discovering that thick, velvet-textured tropic of Cancer, violet black sky, that very early waxing thin, so very slender crescent moon, appearing to be drawn into position by the earth's gravity, yet, like a boat, floating just above the horizon still with a hint of crepuscular glow. These were the experiences that had built their long-term relationship. These walks, these simple joys, these simple garden explorations were at the very heart of their deep-felt companionship, something they always enjoyed together. For Chalmers, alone, deep in this garden, melancholy flowed slowly at first from some yet unmapped corner of his heart. Then, not to be denied, came on like a flood, sad yet sweet. He could hear her voice calling him. A dream in full bloom. He felt like he was home for the briefest instant. His throat contracted. His eyes lost focus. His breathing labored, all simultaneously overcome by the loss of her presence and by the beauty of the garden. There was hurt clutching at his heart. There was jasmine sweetness. There was a beautiful crescent moon low in a velvet sky. And somehow, out of nowhere, the left side of his brain called out to him. His intelligence started his energy, reminding him Liwa, the project. He shook himself, returned to his Dubai reality, his empty quarter reality, his Liwa Kassar project. Right, Chalmers thought. Time to meet Jean-Claude in the library.